You guys saw the title. You know why we're here today, okay? We're talking about Lord of the Rings. The epic to end all epics. Maybe one of the best stories ever told. But what makes it that way? A lot of things. I frankly have had like 20 video ideas while writing this script and studying this story because there's so many things about it that I want to talk about. And you can keep an eye out for characters from this series in our upcoming Enneagram types series where I talk about the different types of Enneagrams that appear in different stories, but that's not why we're here today. Today, we are here to discuss the Lord of the Rings in Dan Harmon's story circle. Let's get into it. Before we get started, you know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to check out that Patreon because we do vote over there once a month on what video you guys want to see next. There are also sneak peeks over there. For example, I'm going to be posting my raw notes that I took while I was just watching the movies over there on the day that this video comes out. So if you want to see those and you want to see the kind of behind the scenes in my process, I might also film something soon about my process in making this video because it is definitely going to be one of the longest videos I've ever undertook. So with that, we will get into it. Spoiler warning. By the way, I don't know who you are if you haven't seen these films. They came out in 2001 to 2003. You've had 21 to 24 years at this point, if I can do math. If you're gonna be upset about spoilers, you can click off now. But if you're like everyone else and you've seen this movie, then let's get into it. In case you didn't know, Lord of the Rings is the story of a hobbit named Frodo who comes into possession of a very strange magical ring from his uncle Bilbo. The ring is intensely powerful and draws people in with its negative energy and promises of power and high esteem and whatever else you find tempting as a person. It draws people in, whispering to them about what it can do for them and why they should be the one to have it. Our main players in this franchise are Frodo Baggins, Samwise Gamgee, Meriadoc Brandybuck, aka Merry, I will never again say Meriadoc, Peregrine Took, aka Pippin, Gandalf, Legolas, and Strider. And for those of you who are hopeful that I read all the books to do this video, no, this video is based on the film adaptations. I've heard that those were pretty faithful to the books, but I, of course, am doing my best here to remember everything that I possibly can to include in the story, and we are using those films for inspiration. This video is going to be kind of a long one because I'm consulting the Lord of the Rings wiki, which, by the way, says the one wiki to rule them all, and I just really enjoy that and had to point it out. I want to give you a full picture of this story, like a really full picture, and though I did watch all the movies and I did take notes on all the movies pretty dedicatedly, I sat down and I was using my notes and I was like, this is not enough. So I'm going to condense the descriptions of each of these movies' plots into different sections of the story circle. So we're going to go through the first movie first, obviously, and then the second and third, and then at the end we're going to go through what the entire trilogy looks like in a story circle. Because yes, while each individual story does have its own story circle, I do also fully believe that if you're writing a trilogy or even a longer series than that, you can use the story circle to your advantage to plot out the entire thing so that it all is as meaningful and powerful as the story circle can make it. So stick around to the end of this video if you want to see that in-depth analysis of how to use the story circle in a trilogy and how to specifically fit these stories into that story circle. And again, please forgive me if I get any small details wrong, okay? I think this video right now is the first time I've ever fully understood all of the world building that Tolkien put into this and where all the places are. Like, they'll say a country and then they'll say a city, and I'm just gonna give you guys a map if I can. But yeah, please forgive any blunders on my part. Oh, also I'm splitting this up filming-wise because it's gonna be long. So today we are going over the Fellowship of the Ring, and then if I look different on other days, that's why. All right. First, we'll discuss the first Lord of the Rings movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. The You section of the story begins with Galadriel, a powerful elf who holds the Ring of Water, telling us how the 19 rings were forged and how the one ring became the most powerful and dangerous of them all. We see that Isildur, the past ruler of Gondor, had the one ring before he was killed, at which point it sank deep into a river. This all belongs in the You section because it establishes our world. So it's a great way to use a prologue and still count it as the You section because we're establishing very important things about our world and about what our protagonist is going to be going through. Protagonists, because this is a multi-protagonist story, and we'll get into that. Fast forward to the present, where we meet Frodo, Bilbo, and the other hobbits. Bilbo is writing his book while Frodo is nowhere to be found because he's off in a peaceful field reading, at which point Gandalf the Grey comes in and we see that he's not only an old friend of Frodo, but Bilbo as well. We learn that Bilbo is dissatisfied with the sameness in his life, and he wants to get away from family issues, and who doesn't? Bilbo, okay? So he's planning for something to happen during his big birthday celebration. He mentions to Gandalf that he would take Frodo with him, but Frodo still loves the Shire. Then it's Bilbo's birthday! He's 11. I don't know how old that actually is. Is that 111? I don't know, help me. We get to learn more about our characters here, as Frodo is established as being more fun and bold, while Samwise, his friend, is meeker and a little shy.
Go on, Sam. Ask Rosie for a dance. I think I'll just have another ale. Oh, no, you don't. Go on.
Merry and Pippin, their friends, cause a bunch of trouble with fireworks, and at the end of his 11th birthday celebration, Bilbo puts on the ring and disappears before everyone's eyes. Following the party, Bilbo gives the ring to Frodo. This is where need comes in. Gandalf begins to suspect that Bilbo's ring, that Frodo now has, could be the One Ring, which has been lost for over 3,000 years. He goes to a place called Minas Tirith, which will be very important later, to research more about his theory, and he finds these historical documents through which he learns that the One Ring is engraven with lines of black speech that can only be seen when it is lit up by fire. He then goes to Bag End, where he meets with Frodo and confirms that the ring that was passed on to Frodo is the One Ring, and even sees Sauron's eye when trying to pick up the ring, which confirms to Gandalf that Sauron knows where he, Frodo, and the ring are, the Shire. It's at this point that Gandalf tells Frodo of the dangers of the ring and tells him to leave the Shire immediately. And we learn around this same time that a creature has been captured and revealed that a Baggins has the ring in Bag End. Frodo asks Gandalf to take the ring, but Gandalf refuses. And then Gandalf finds Samwise Gamgee eavesdropping outside the window.
Confound it all, Samwise Gamgee! Have you been eavesdropping?
I ain't been dropping no eaves, sir, honest. I was just cutting the grass under the window there, if you follow me. I heard raised voices.
What did you hear? Speak!
Nothing important. That is, I heard a good deal about a ring and a Dark Lord and something about the end of the world, but please, Mr. Gandalf, sir, don't hurt me. Don't turn me into anything unnatural.
No. Perhaps not.
And decides to send him with Frodo. Gandalf lets them know that the ring wants to be found, and that they need to move very carefully. Now we're in Go. While Frodo escapes the Shire to head for the town of Bree, Gandalf rides to Isengard to meet with Saruman the White. Yes, there is a Sauron and there is a Saruman. Which brings us to Search. During their meeting, Saruman tells Gandalf that the Nazgul, aka Ring Wraiths, have already left to capture the ring and kill whoever has it. When Gandalf tries to leave to warn Frodo, Saruman traps him in his tower and tries to convince him to join him and Sauron, at which point Gandalf refuses and he and Saruman fight. Gandalf loses the fight and is trapped in Saruman's tower, while Saruman forces him to watch the army prep to hunt down and kill Frodo. Gandalf whispers to a little moth, and we're taken back to Sam and Frodo, where Merry and Pippin suddenly appear with them, having apparently followed them.
Sam, we're still in the Shire. What could possibly happen?
Frodo! Mary, it's Frodo Baggins!
Hello, Frodo.
Get off!
And they journey together to Bree. During this journey, we continue to see Frodo being kind, encouraging, and determined, even despite the fact that his life is in danger. Frodo has a moment in which he's tempted to put on the ring, and we see its power, and the hobbits have a spooky encounter with a ring wraith, during which Frodo almost doesn't make it onto the boat to Bree, but they do eventually get to Bree together, except Gandalf isn't there. In the restaurant in Bree, Frodo accidentally falls and puts on the ring, at which point Sauron sees him and ring wraiths set their sights on Bree. This is when Strider, a mysterious man in the back of the inn, takes the hobbits and hides them in a separate room, while ring wraiths murder a bunch of pillows in another. Strider then agrees to take the hobbits to Rivendell, the land of the elves, and they set off on their journey. As they head to their next destination, Strider sings of an elven woman and thus introduces a big piece of his conflict, and it's a gorgeous song, if I do say so myself.
Who is she? This woman you sing of.
'Tis the lay of Luthien, the elf maiden who gave her love to Beren, a mortal.
Then they all make it to Weathertop, where Merry and Pippin decide to cook some food because hobbits are always eating, and accidentally alert the ring wraiths to their location. Frodo is unfortunately stabbed by a Morgul blade, which is laced with poison that will turn him into a wraith if not treated quickly enough. It's at this point that Arwen shows up, who offers to take Frodo ahead of everyone else and runs from the wraiths. They make it to Rivendell safely, and Arwen's father Elrond heals Frodo. In Rivendell, Frodo sees Gandalf, who explains that he had to escape Saruman's tower on an eagle, and that's why he couldn't meet them at Bree. It's at this point that the others arrive, and Elrond calls a council to decide what to do with the ring. And here we have our midpoint for the first movie. I like to use the midpoint to very reliably define the difference between search and find, because ideally in the story circle, search flows very seamlessly into find. It's a very natural progression. So sometimes it can be hard in other stories and in our own stories to identify where that shift happens. But it's much easier if you use the midpoint, which is from like the 3 or 4 act structure. That is a very helpful tool to use here. Some other tools I like to use are the inciting incident for knowing when go is happening, or the climax for knowing when we're at the end of take. So identifying that midpoint, that part where things change drastically between what was happening before and what will be happening from now on, is my best tip for how to identify the difference between the find and search section, not only in other stories but in your own as well. It's during this meeting at Rivendell that our midpoint happens in the Fellowship of the Ring. Elrond doesn't want to keep the ring at Rivendell because he doesn't want the elves to be attacked by Mordor, Sauron's army, and Isengard, Saruman's army. Frodo watches as the group argues about who should take the ring and why they should keep it and why they should be the ones to have it, at which point the idea is given that the ring should be destroyed by throwing it into the fires of Mount Doom, where it was created. That is the only way it can be destroyed. And some people in this group are not that happy about that, which Frodo senses, and he decides to step up and volunteer to be the one to take the ring to Mordor.
I will take the ring to Mordor. I do not know the way.
Strider, who in the scene right before this is revealed to be Aragorn, heir to the throne of Gondor, volunteers to go with, as well as Sam, Merry, Pippin, Legolas, and Gimli, and thus our fellowship is born. That brings us to Find. The fellowship starts by trying to pass over the Misty Mountains, but Saruman creates a storm that triggers avalanches and heavy snow, which nearly kills the fellowship. Gimli convinces everyone to go into the mines of Moria, which they go into and find everyone dead, to Gimli's dismay, because these people were his family and he thought they were okay. While in the mines, Pippin accidentally alerts the goblins below to their presence, and they end up having to fight off the goblins. Frodo is injured in the fight, but reveals the mithril shirt that Bilbo gave him at Rivendell, which kept him safe. And as the group is fighting off the goblins, they encounter a Balrog, which takes us into Take. The Balrog drives the goblins away, but ultimately ends up killing Gandalf when he causes the Balrog to fall to the depths below, but falls along with it. It's at this point that the group escapes to Lothlorien, where Galadriel offers them shelter and meets with Frodo at night to tell him it's his destiny to destroy the ring and to do this creepy shit.
In place of a Dark Lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous as the sea! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall love me and despair!
And then the fellowship is off again. Just like that. We're gonna pretend that never happened, Galadriel. It's here that Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo, but Frodo escapes his threats. As Frodo escapes, Aragorn sees him and Frodo offers Aragorn the ring. But Aragorn resists the temptation and tells Frodo that he must continue to Mordor alone, because he knows no one else in the Fellowship will be able to resist the ring. As Frodo runs, the rest of the Fellowship is attacked by orcs. As Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli fight off the orcs nearby, Merry and Pippin distract the orcs near Frodo so Frodo can escape. Boromir runs to help Merry and Pippin and ends up being shot by three arrows. Aragorn tends to Boromir as he dies, and Boromir reveals that he regrets trying to take the ring. Merry and Pippin, in their efforts to distract the orcs, are captured by the orcs, at which point Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, who I will from now on be calling Aragorn and co., decide to follow the orcs to rescue the hobbits. And now we have Return and Changed, which happened at the same time in this first movie. Frodo runs to the nearby river and begins to row away when we see that Sam has been following him and insists on swimming out after him, recalling that he promised Gandalf he would watch over Frodo.
I'm going to Mordor alone.
Of course you are! And I'm coming with you!
You can't swim! Sam!
Frodo rows over to Sam, accepting his help and companionship, and brings him onto the boat, and together they continue their journey. And that brings us to Lord of the Rings 2, The Two Towers. This movie begins with a flashback to Gandalf fighting the Balrog back in the mines from the last movie. We see that after he and the creature fell, they continued fighting as they fell into a lake deep below. We then go into a shot of Frodo, who's still continuing his journey with Sam. This lets us know we're in the you section. We see that Frodo is still on his journey, but is haunted by Gandalf's death. At least that's what I like to interpret from that. Sam and Frodo continue to travel until they are attacked one night by Gollum, who wants to get the ring back. Sam and Frodo capture Gollum, but Frodo sees himself and his own plight with the ring in Gollum and understands the toll that the ring has taken on the creature, and therefore he decides to take pity on him, much to Sam's dismay. He enlists Gollum as their guide through Mordor. Back in Rohan, Aragorn and co. are still following the orcs, who are taking the hobbits to Isengard.
They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! God! They're taking the hobbits to Isengard! God!
This is also part of the you section, establishing that Aragorn and co. are still doing what they were when we last saw them. They still need to find the hobbits, and they are still continuing their search. Meanwhile, the need section happens when we see that the King of Rohan is being held in a trance by his main man, whose name is actually apparently Grima Wormtongue. Accurate. This guy is also a little sleeper agent for Saruman, who's aiming to destroy Rohan and has been tormenting them with armies of orcs who have been destroying their crops and killing their people. A woman sends her children to warn the King of Rohan that his son has been mortally injured by this army very recently. And at the same time, the king's nephew, Eomer, tells the king that Grima is a spy, and Grima convinces the king to banish Eomer for this. Eomer then gathers the remaining loyal men of Rohan and sets out to ambush and kill the orcs. This brings on Go, wherein Merry and Pippin escape the orcs and flee into the forest nearby called Fangorn, where they meet Treebeard, the oldest Ent of Middle-earth. This is where it gets a little confusing, because in the second and especially third movie, we have all these different little storylines going. In the first movie, the Fellowship of the Ring is pretty much all together, the same place at the same time for most of the story. In the second and third movies, they're all split up, and so we have a bunch of different little story circles going on for each group. So for those of you who have been asking how to write the story circle with a bigger cast, here you go. This is a perfect example. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam's need and go happens as they are traversing the dead marshes with Gollum. They see the Black Gate of Mordor from atop a mountain, but they deduce that it's too dangerous to walk right in. They will be captured. This reveals their need to get into Mordor a safer way. At this point, Gollum reveals that he can get them into Mordor a different way. Sam is suspicious, but Frodo believes him due to his loyalty thus far. So they listen to Gollum and begin following him along an alternate route, and we move into Go. Then we see Aragorn and co. as they meet Eomer. He tells them that there were no survivors of the battle with the orcs, and when they get to the battle site, Viggo Mortensen famously breaks his freaking toe kicking that helmet, as Aragorn believes that the hobbits are dead.
It's one of their wee belts.
But then he picks up the tracks of the hobbits, leading right over into Fangorn Forest. The trio goes into the forest to try to find them, and this is when they run into a wizard, masked by an intense, blinding white light. Afraid it is Saruman, they threaten the wizard and tell him to reveal himself, at which point the light fades, and we see it's Gandalf the White. He reveals that he did in fact die in the battle with the Balrog, but was brought back to continue unfinished business. I'm a little bit hesitant about what point this plays in the story, but I believe that this meeting Gandalf is part of Go, because he does tell them one part of your journey is over and another has now begun. The other thing that I think it could be is the midpoint, but it's a little too early for the midpoint for these guys. So we're gonna call this the end of Go for them. So now we're in search, for these four at least. Together, the four of them go to Rohan, where they remove Saruman's hold on Theoden, the king of Rohan, and throw Wormtongue out. Upon waking from his stupor and realizing the threat of the orcs, Theoden decides to flee Rohan and evacuate his people to Helm's Deep. Realizing that Helm's Deep isn't strong enough to survive the orc attack, Gandalf leaves to find Eomer and promises to return within 5 days with the banished riders Eomer took with him. This is when Aragorn works with Éowyn, Éomer's sister, to lead the people of Rohan to Helm's Deep. They grow close, and Éowyn soon asks about the necklace Aragorn wears, at which point he reveals that he is in love with Arwen.
Where is she? The woman who gave you that jewel.
And told her to leave Middle-earth to go be with her people in the Undying Lands. Meanwhile, Wormtongue meets with Saruman to let him know of Helm's Deep's weaknesses and tell him how their armies can exploit those weaknesses to get into the city. Saruman sends his army to Helm's Deep and orders them to spare no one. Now we're back with Sam and Frodo in their search section. It's at this point the trio sees the Rangers of Ithilien ambush a branch of Saruman's army, and these Rangers take Frodo and Sam prisoner. I believe this is a midpoint for Frodo and Sam, which, yes, is a very short search section. But sometimes that can happen when we're in a trilogy, and that search as well as you and Need and Go, is a little bit left over from the last story. This is a great opportunity for me to say that you don't always have to follow the story circle exactly. The beauty of it is that it's a little bit malleable, you know? You can use it how it works for you. There are probably some people out there who think that a certain amount of your story should be dedicated to each section, which yes, is a recipe for success. But when looking at one of the most successful stories of all time that did cut the story circle's first little bit short in the second installment of the story, I think that's okay. I think it's allowed. Meanwhile, as they're venturing to Helm's Deep, the people of Rohan are attacked by Saruman's orcs. During this fight, Aragorn is thrown off a cliff into a fast-flowing river below, and everyone thinks he died. We see Elrond trying to convince Arwen to leave on the ships departing to the Undying Lands, which she initially refuses. He then uses his power to show her the grief she'll feel when Aragorn eventually dies, because his life is so short compared to hers, because elves basically live forever. This time, when Elrond asks, Arwen agrees to leave. Now we're back to Frodo and Sam, who are in Find now and have been taken to the stronghold of the Rangers of Ithilien by a man who we soon learn to be Faramir, Boromir's younger brother.
My men tell me that you are orc spies.
Spies? Now wait just a minute.
Well, if you're not spies, then who are you? Speak.
We are hobbits of the Shire. Frodo Baggins is my name, and this is Samwise Gamgee,
Your bodyguard?
his gardener.
Gollum evaded capture by the Rangers, but Faramir catches him fishing in a sacred pool. He wants to kill Gollum, but Frodo tells him he is bound to Gollum and gets Gollum out of the pool and to safety, only for the Rangers to then capture and interrogate Gollum, which destroys Gollum's fragile trust in Frodo. When Faramir speaks of keeping the ring to prove his worth to his father, the placeholder king of Gondor, Denethor, Sam tells Faramir that Boromir died due to his desire for the ring.
Take them to my father. Tell him Faramir sends a mighty gift. A weapon that will change our fortunes in this war.
You want to know what happened to Boromir? You want to know why your brother died? He tried to take the ring from Frodo. After swearing an oath to protect him, he tried to kill him. The ring drove your brother mad.
Meanwhile, in Rohan, Aragorn washes up on the riverbank and Theodred's horse, Brago, wakes him up. That's the dead son of Theoden. He tells the horse to take him to Helm's Deep and passes Saruman's orc army on the way, but doesn't engage and instead goes straight to Helm's Deep, where he's met with much relief at the realization that he's alive. This relief is short-lived, though, as Aragorn tells King Theoden that orcs are on the way. Upon nightfall, an army of elves arrives to let Theoden know that they were sent by Elrond to aid in the fight. And as all of this is happening, Merry and Pippin request help from the Ents with the battle, and the Ents begin a very slow-moving discussion on whether or not to fight Saruman.
It's been going for hours.
They must have decided something by now.
Decided? No. We only just finished saying good morning.
Here is when the Battle of Helm's Deep begins. As this battle is beginning, I do believe that is the midpoint not only for Aragorn and his group, but kind of for the entire story, because it's a landmark battle that is one of the multiple victories along the way to really conquering the major threat. And that's a great way to find the midpoint, is to look for the progress that's being made against the threat, and again, how the story shifts before and after. So not the entire battle is the midpoint, because I do believe the battle takes place all across Find and Take in this story for Aragorn and his group, but the battle actually beginning I do think is the midpoint. They fight valiantly, but explosives end up blasting a hole in the wall around Helm's Deep, and the orcs manage to get into the city, which I think is when we get into Take. When the orcs start getting closer into Helm's Deep and start getting into the city, I think that marks a rise in the tension that does take us into Take for this group. This is when we see that the Ents have not decided to help with the battle.
Our friends are out there. They need our help. They cannot fight this war on their own.
War, yes. It affects us all. Tree, root, and twig. The Ents cannot hold back this storm. We must weather such things as we have always done.
How can that be your decision?
This is not our war.
Treebeard begins to take Pippin and Merry home, but Pippin asks him to instead take them north, to the part of Fangorn that Saruman recently decimated near Isengard. When Treebeard sees the dead Ents in this area, he commands the other Ents to seek vengeance with him, and the Ents gather to march to Isengard. This brings about return for Aragorn and co. This is when Aragorn encourages a despairing Theoden to continue fighting. He, Legolas, and the riders of Rohan go out on a ride to distract the orc army in an attempt to allow the women and children to escape into the mountains. It's when Aragorn and this group are leaving the keep that Gandalf appears with Éomer and his men. They all rush down to the orc army, fighting them off and causing them to flee to Fangorn, where the Ents fight and kill them by breaking the dam on the River Isen, thus drowning surviving orcs and quenching the fires of Isengard. This floods Isengard and strands Saruman in his tower. This entire section of the movie is return because even though we're not returning anywhere physically, we've reached a point when order has been restored enough that our characters are able to triumph against the threats they've faced and lost to thus far. So there's a little bit of a switch here going into this section where they start to have success against something that they were previously really not successful at fighting back. But don't forget about Frodo and Sam. Back with Faramir, they're entering their take section as Faramir has them taken to Osgiliath, a city between Mordor and Gondor. There they encounter a ring wraith and Frodo nearly gives up the ring. Faramir and Sam stop him, but Frodo pulls a sword on Sam due to the bidding of the ring and nearly kills him.
It's me. It's your Sam. Don't you know you're Sam?
As they watch the ring wraith fly off, we reach their return and changed section of the movie, where Sam has a deep, inspiring monologue during which he reflects on the state he and Frodo are in and the hope for their journey. Sam encourages Frodo to continue fighting through his doubt and to hold on to what they set out to fight for, each other and the fulfillment of their quest. It's when Faramir hears this conversation that he realizes he can't interrupt their quest, and he sets the hobbits free. Back at Helm's Deep, Gandalf delivers the line, "The battle for Helm's Deep is over. The battle for Middle-earth is about to begin." He says all hope now lies with Frodo and Sam, who we see resuming their journey with Gollum, who is now feeling betrayed by Frodo and is leading the hobbits to their doom. And now we've reached the third movie and my personal favorite, The Return of the King. I hope you have some popcorn, because this movie, the extended version, the real version, is 4.5 hours long. This film's U section is introduced by a flashback to Gollum's past, where we listen to some fantastically eerie music. And see that Gollum was once a hobbit-like creature known as Smeagol. His cousin found the ring while they were fishing, and upon seeing the ring, Smeagol killed his cousin to get it. After this, we see Smeagol escape to the Misty Mountains and slowly deteriorate into the creature Gollum. Given the huge role Gollum plays in the coming movie, this focus on his backstory, especially in the U section, makes sense. U continues when we see that Gollum is still guiding Sam and Frodo, and Sam is still not happy with Frodo's sense of trust in Gollum. Meanwhile, Aragorn and co arrive at Isengard, which is still completely flooded. There they reunite with Merry and Pippin, and Treebeard tells them Isengard has been taken by the Ents and Saruman is imprisoned inside his tower. It's here that Saruman tells Gandalf that Frodo is heading towards his doom and Aragorn will never be crowned king of Gondor, thus introducing this movie's need. So as we go throughout the movie, you'll see that those are the two things we need to happen for this movie to succeed, is we need Aragorn to take up his throne as king, and we need Frodo to succeed in his quest to destroy the ring. Gandalf tells Saruman he will be spared if he comes down from his tower, but Saruman instead attacks Gandalf with a fireball. Gandalf lives and shatters Saruman's staff, therefore casting him out of the Order of Wizards, and that's when Grima appears. Theoden offers to let Grima back into Rohan, at which point Grima bows to Theoden, but when Saruman insults Rohan, tells Grima he will never be free, and slaps Grima to the floor, Grima retorts with a fatal stab to Saruman's back. Power move. Complete power move. Legolas shoots Grima with an arrow but does not save Saruman, who falls from the top of his tower and is impaled on the watermill. Also legendary. Such a good moment. The watermill spins and submerges Saruman, at which point the eye, which apparently is called a palantir, falls from his sleeve. Pippin sees it and jumps down from Aragorn's horse to get it, at which point he is told to give it to Gandalf, and does. Knowing the Ents are going to take care of Isengard, the group rides for Rohan, where they celebrate the victory at Helm's Deep by having a fun drinking game in which Legolas delivers this golden line.
I feel something. A slight tingle in my fingers. I think it's affecting me.
and eventually wins after Gimli passes out. Éowyn gives Aragorn the Cup of Kings her father Theoden gave her, at which point the king, Theoden, says he is happy for Éowyn. He continues on to say Aragorn is an honorable man, and it was not himself, the king, that led them to victory, implying that the victory at Helm's Deep truly did belong to Aragorn. Merry and Pippin dance drunkenly, during which Pippin realizes Gandalf is watching him, and Aragorn and Gandalf talk about Frodo and Sam's quest. Gandalf tells Aragorn that though he has received no news of Frodo, his heart confirms Frodo is still alive. Back near the Mountains of Shadow, Frodo and Sam sleep, while Gollum sneaks away and argues with himself over killing the hobbits and taking the ring. Gollum decides to take the hobbits up a stairway, where she will kill them, and he'll take the ring from their remains. Sam hears this plan and attacks Gollum, but Frodo, still believing Gollum is good, pulls Sam away. This establishes the need of the third movie. Sam and Frodo are still trying to get to Mordor, and they need to stay safe while doing so. Back with Aragorn and co., the group reaches Go, as Pippin is fascinated by the Palantir and takes it from Gandalf while he sleeps, which allows Sauron to see him. Sauron attempts to interrogate the Hobbit via the psychic link the Palantir creates. I'm so sorry if I'm not saying that right. Let's see really quickly. Palantir. Oh, perfect, okay. And Pippin almost gives in before Aragorn and Gandalf wrestle the Palantir from him. Gandalf asks the extremely shaken Pippin if he revealed anything about Frodo in the ring, but Pippin denies it and tells Gandalf he saw a dead white tree in a courtyard of stone surrounded by a city in flames. The next morning, certain that Sauron will come after Pippin, thinking he has the ring, and that Gondor will be attacked by Sauron's army due to Pippin's vision, Gandalf begins to make a plan. He tells Theoden to look to the beacons of Gondor. If they are lit, Rohan must be ready for war. But Theoden maintains that Gondor never helped Rohan, so Rohan owes Gondor nothing. So Gandalf tells Aragorn to travel south and use the black ships to aid Gondor. He then sets out for Gondor and takes Pippin with him to keep him safe from Sauron and keep him from endangering the group further. Merry watches them depart, forlorn, and remarks to Aragorn that he's always been there for Pippin, and now he's gone, just like Frodo and Sam. Aragorn tells Merry,
One thing I've learned about hobbits. They are most hardy folk.
Foolhardy, maybe. He's a took.
which is just so cute, and I needed to include it. Meanwhile, we see Arwen traveling with a company of elves, presumably to leave for the Undying Lands. During this journey, she has a vision of her future son with Aragorn, which convinces her to turn back to Rivendell. There, she tells her father to reforge the Sword of Elendil so it may be given to Aragorn. And though Elrond is resistant because he knows this means Arwen will want to become mortal, Arwen tells him this is her choice and there is no ship that can take her away now. So he reforges the sword. Gandalf and Pippin ride to Minas Tirith, the city of kings in Gondor. It's before they enter the throne hall that Pippin notices the white tree from his vision. Gandalf explains that Gondorians believe one day this tree will flower again when their true king returns to the throne. Gandalf also tells Pippin not to talk while they're meeting with the steward of Gondor, Denethor. But of course, when he sees that Denethor has nearly been driven mad with grief and refuses to ask for help from Rohan in defending Gondor, Pippin tells Denethor how Boromir died and pledges his service to Denethor in gratitude for Boromir saving his and Merry's lives. In the end, Denethor refuses to let Aragorn and his forces help him as he wants Gondor to remain his. Angry, Gandalf leaves, and Pippin follows. Gandalf tells him of the line of kings failing in Gondor and that Gondor was given over to lesser men. He also tells Pippin that Sauron's army will use fumes to cover Gondor's sky and allow the orcs to pass through and conquer the city. Meanwhile, Frodo, Sam, and Gollum continue their journey through the woods near Gondor, and Sam notices that the sky is growing darker every day, which marks the Go section of the story. Gandalf also explains to Pippin that Sauron has sent his deadliest servant to lead his men into war, the Witch King of Angmar, the leader of the Ringwraiths and the most powerful of them, the one who struck Frodo down on Weathertop. As he says this, Frodo, Sam, and Gollum move towards the evil city of Minas Morgul. Gollum tries to lead them up some stairs on a huge cliff face, but the power of Minas Morgul draws the ring close to it, and Frodo goes with it. Sam and Gollum pull him away, and as they do, a pillar of green fire rises from Minas Morgul and shoots up into the sky. Back in Gondor, Gandalf and Pippin witness this signal. At Minas Morgul, Frodo collapses and the city goes silent, and suddenly the Witch King swoops out of Minas Morgul on his Nazgul bird and lets out a screech, which stuns Frodo and makes him feel the Wraith's blade once again. Then the huge army of Sauron begins marching out of Minas Morgul towards Gondor, led by the Witch King. At this point, search has begun for Frodo and Sam, who begin to climb up the stairs on the cliff's face. Sam warns Gollum not to hurt Frodo or else they'll leave him behind. Back in Gondor, Gandalf realizes that Mordor's army is on the move and has Pippin climb up the signal beacon to light it. Back at Osgiliath, Faramir and his rangers prepare their weaponry, and orc troops surprise attack the stronghold. Faramir leads the defense of the city, but the orcs lower a ramp into the city, and the city is soon overrun with their army. Meanwhile, Pippin lights the signal beacon high above the city, and Gandalf sees the other beacons lighting up along the White Mountains. Though Denethor is not happy about this, Gandalf knows that hope has come to Gondor. They will be receiving aid. I believe this is the midpoint for Gandalf and Pippin, as this is the moment things begin to change drastically for the Battle of Gondor. Back in Rohan, Aragorn sees the beacons in the White Mountains and quickly runs to tell Theoden that
The beacons are lit! Gun knuckles for aid!
And Rohan will answer. Muster the Rohirrim!
Aragorn and co get ready to ride for Gondor and to war, and Éowyn tells Aragorn she will be riding with them. The men have found Aragorn as their captain, and he has given them hope. They will follow him to battle and even to death. Among this, Merry pledges his allegiance to Theoden. Theoden accepts and tells Merry to don his armor. Then Aragorn and co, which now consists of Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Theoden, Éowyn, Éomer, and Merry, leave for Gondor. This serves as the midpoint for their line of the story. Diet Coke break. Man, this is so much reading. At Osgiliath, the orcs overrun the city, and as his men die around him, Faramir barely escapes an attack. After his fellow rangers fire arrows at the pocket of orcs pursuing him, he realizes that the city is lost and the orcs have won. In their escape, he and his rangers ride for Gondor. As he and his men retreat, they're attacked by Nazgul on winged steeds, and Gandalf and Pippin ride towards them. Gandalf drives the Nazgul back with a beam of light from his staff, and inside the city, Faramir tells Gandalf of the orcs that are overtaking Osgiliath and crossing the river. Upon Faramir seeing Pippin, Gandalf realizes Faramir recently saw 2 other hobbits as well, and tells him that he must let Gandalf know everything he knows about Frodo and Sam. Faramir lets him know that they are heading towards Cirith Ungol. Denethor confronts his son and tells him he's ashamed of Faramir's loss of Osgiliath and the fact that he let a hobbit take the One Ring rather than bring it back to the citadel of Gondor. He insists that Boromir would have brought back the ring, and even though Faramir assures him that he would have taken the ring and fallen,
Boromir would not have brought the ring. He would have stretched out his hand to this thing, and taking it, he would have fallen.
You know nothing of this matter.
He would have kept it for his own. When he returned, you would not have known your son.
Boromir was loyal to me, not some wizard pupil.
Denethor tells Faramir he does not see him as a trustworthy son. He tells Faramir to leave his sight, and Faramir does. All of this is a great example of how to ramp up the tension in your story following the midpoint, once the midpoint hits. Things were dire before, but kind of in a less emotionally impactful way. Like now things are getting more dire in a way that bothers the characters and therefore us a little more. To put it succinctly, things were dire before, but they're beginning to feel much more emotionally intense and foreboding for the characters we care about. Back at the cliff steps, Frodo and Sam are climbing when Gollum slips. Frodo moves to help him up, at which point Gollum sees the ring around Frodo's neck and reaches for it, until Sam draws his sword, when Gollum switches and goes for Frodo's hand instead. As Sam climbs up after them, Gollum begins to poison Frodo against Sam, telling him that Sam will soon take the ring for himself. As the forces of Mordor prepare their army in Osgiliath, with the Witch King's sights set on breaking Gandalf, the soldiers at Gondor ask Gandalf if Rohan will come to aid them, to which he responds, "Courage is our best defense." In the throne hall, we see Pippin dressed in Faramir's armor from childhood, and Faramir tells Pippin that Denethor, who always saw Boromir as the stronger child, made the armor for him. Pippin tells Faramir that he has strength of a different kind, and one day Denethor will see that in him and come to value him for it. This is when Pippin enters Denethor's service, and in the throne room is shocked to hear that Denethor wants Faramir to retake Osgiliath. Faramir realizes upon this request that his father wishes he had died in Boromir's place, and now would like him to pay for it.
Osgiliath must be retaken.
My lord, Osgiliath is overrun.
Much must be risked in war.
You wish now that our places had been exchanged, that I had died and Boromir had lived.
Yes. I wish that.
Faramir says he'll go if Denethor will think higher of him when he returns. Denethor replies that this will depend on the manner of his return, and Faramir leaves. Just a side note that this is an excellent way to give some perspective and justification for Faramir's response to the ring earlier, which is that he wanted to take it so that his father would have more pride in him and see his worth and value. Enneagram 3, anyone? Sam and Frodo sleep on a ledge hundreds of feet above Minas Morgul. As they sleep, Gollum drops their bread down the cliff. When he wakes up, Sam discovers what happened and blames Gollum. But once Frodo wakes, Gollum continues to poison him against Sam. When Sam sees the trouble the ring is giving Frodo and asks if he can carry it to help him, Frodo suddenly pushes Sam away. Sam watches in horror as Frodo tells him that he no longer needs him and he can leave.
No, Sam. It's you. I'm sorry, Sam. But he's a liar. He's poisoned you against me. You can't help me anymore. You don't mean that. Go home.
Sam does, and Frodo continues to climb with Gollum behind him. I believe this is the midpoint of Sam and Frodo's adventures in this movie, because it marks the moment that because of Gollum and the ring, Frodo loses trust in Sam and places all his faith in Gollum. It's after this that Faramir and his men charge out towards Osgiliath, and in Gondor, Pippin sings to Denethor as his son and his men ride to a doomed fate. Gorgeous song, by the way. This man's a singer. It's so good.
Through shadow, to the edge of night.
Pippin sings as Faramir draws his sword to the enemy and the orcs draw their bows and prepare to fire in return. Denethor eats his weight in food while the orcs rain arrows on Faramir's cavalry and massacre them. We then go back to Aragorn, who is with the men of Rohan as they set up camp and prepare for war. King Theoden is told that several of their alliances have not yet come, and when Theoden and Aragorn go to view the army, Theoden says there are 6,000 men ready, to which Aragorn replies that is not enough to break the lines of Mordor. Theoden tells him more men will come, but Aragorn says every hour lost hastens Gondor's defeat. They have until dawn before they must ride. Things are looking dire and becoming more intense, which tells us we are clearly in find. Also of note at this part is the creepy road that everyone's afraid of and that spooks the horses. When Aragorn looks at it, he sees a spectral figure staring back at him. Gimli distracts him, and when Aragorn looks back, the figure is gone. We love a little ghost action in our Lord of the Rings. That night, Éowyn prepares Merry for battle, and he remarks that his sword isn't even sharp. As she takes him to the bladesmith, telling him he won't kill many orcs with a blunt blade, her brother Éomer tells her Merry is not ready for war. When she asks why Merry can't fight for those he loves, Éomer tells her that both she and Merry know little of war, and that war is the province of men, and Merry will fall to the fear of battle and flee when he comes face to face with the enemy. As this is happening, Aragorn has a nightmare in his tent, wherein he sees Arwen die at Sauron's power, and the Evenstar, his necklace, shatter. When he wakes, he is called to Theoden's tent, where Elrond tells him that as Sauron's power grows, Arwen's lifespan shortens. Elrond tells Aragorn they are outnumbered, and they will need more men if they are to win this fight. When Aragorn says there are none, Elrond reminds him of the men that dwell in the mountains. Aragorn tells him those men are murderers and traitors who don't believe in anything and will answer to no one. Elrond then says they will answer to the king of Gondor, and presents Aragorn with the reforged sword of Elendil. Elrond explains to Aragorn that with this blade he can summon an army that even Sauron cannot withstand, and it is time to put aside the ranger and become who he was born to be. It's at this point that Aragorn finally accepts his destiny to be king. As he leaves to get the newfound army, Éowyn begs him not to go and professes her love to him. Aragorn tells her she has fallen in love with the shadow, and he cannot give her what she seeks. It's here that he leaves with Legolas and Gimli by his side, who refuse to let him go alone. The three of them move slowly down the silent road that leads to the paths of the dead. Legolas tells them of the curse Isildur laid upon them for not fighting in the War of the Last Alliance, that they were never to rest until they had fulfilled their pledge of allegiance to Gondor. When they reach the Dark Door, a burst of evil scares their horses away. Aragorn says he does not fear death and enters the door, with Legolas and Gimli following. Meanwhile, back at the camp, the men of Rohan mount their horses and prepare to ride for Gondor. But as Merry prepares his horse, Theoden tells him he cannot come with them. It is a 3-day ride to Minas Tirith, and he needs all men and beasts to have their strength when they arrive. None of the riders can have the hobbit as a burden. Merry pleads with Theoden, but Theoden dismisses him.
I want to fight.
I will say no more.
As he resigns himself to staying at camp, Merry is suddenly scooped away onto an unknown rider's horse.
Ride with me.
My lady.
As As the men of Rohan ride out towards Gondor, the massive army of Mordor marches upon Gondor. And inside the Dead Mountain, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli move through tunnels and caverns of the dead, and as they avoid the ghostly mists that lurk the paths, they find themselves walking upon piles of skulls and bones. Then they enter the lair of the King of the Dead, and find the ghost army dwelling in the immense caves. Aragorn tells them he can fulfill their oath, but the King of the Dead says none but the King of Gondor may command them. Aragorn shows him Andúril, and the King of the Dead attacks him. After fighting off his attack, the King of the Dead says,
"That line was broken."
To which Aragorn replies,
"It has been remade."
Aragorn orders them as their king to join them on the battlefield at Gondor, and there, once they have destroyed the enemy, he will hold their oath fulfilled. However, the ghosts refuse and slowly disappear. Aragorn calls out to them, and Gimli furiously calls them traitors. As the walls begin to shake, the entire cave collapses, and thousands of skulls avalanche upon the three. Driven out of the cave by the cascade of skulls, Aragorn and co barely escape, and they exit the cave only to see an armada of black ships. As they watch the ships leave a burning city, Aragorn falls to his knees, believing all hope is lost and that they have failed. It's then that the King of the Dead appears from inside the mountain and agrees to join Aragorn in battle. Back in Gondor, the attack on Minas Tirith begins. While orcs attack armies down on the fields, Faramir's lifeless body is dragged into the city, where the guards take it up to the citadel, upon which Denethor is heartbroken to find his only surviving son seemingly killed. A soldier tells him they were outnumbered, and none survived. Here's a not really necessary, but absolutely gnarly detail that tells us we are definitely now in Take. Outside the city, the commander of the Mordor army feels the fear raging inside the city, and commands his underlings to ease the pain of those in the city by releasing the prisoners, at which point they fire the severed heads of dead soldiers from catapults at the walls, causing panic, disgust, and terror. So that's freaking sick. In the citadel, Pippin checks Faramir's wound and tries to tell Denethor that Faramir is still alive, which Denethor does not want to hear. He talks to himself of all hope being lost, feeling that Rohan has deserted him and King Theoden betrayed him. At this point, Gandalf, disgusted by Denethor, hits him several times with his staff and knocks him out.
Abandon your post! Flee! Flee for your lives!
Prepare for battle!
As the orcs' siege upon the city continues, the Witch King and the Nazgul attack the city upon their flying steeds, killing many men and inflicting heavy damage upon the Gondorian catapults, effectively rendering the city defenseless. The screeches of the Nazgul birds send Gondorians into panic and fear, including Pippin, but Gandalf tells them not to give in to their fear and to stand their posts, nevertheless the danger. As the orcs charge a battering ram at Gondor's gates, Pippin runs onto the walls, where Gandalf is fighting off invading orcs. Gandalf tells him to retreat to the citadel, but Pippin says he was called out to fight. Two orcs attack Pippin, intent on killing him, at which point Gandalf intervenes and tells Pippin that the battlefield is no place for a hobbit. An orc charges straight for Gandalf, but Pippin stabs it and kills it instantly. At this point, Gandalf recognizes Pippin's strength and ability, but still hurries him back to the top of the city where he can be safe. As the battering ram fails, the orcs tell their leader that the gate is too strong and nothing can breach it, so they switch tactics to a giant wolf-shaped battering ram. Of course, because that seems like the normal conflict escalator. Battering ram to wolf-shaped battering ram. Love that. As Gandalf sees the battering ram approaching, chaos rules within Gondor's walls. Meanwhile, Aragorn and co confront the black ships, warning the sailors not to enter Gondor. The captain says he cannot deny passage, to which Aragorn has Legolas fire a warning shot past one of the sailors' ears. As he does so, Gimli knocks Legolas's bow, causing the arrow to hit a different sailor in the chest and kill him. Gimli says they should surrender immediately, but when the pirates refuse, Aragorn has the army of the dead obliterate them. So with everyone else now firmly in Take, we go back to Frodo, who is still in Find. Gollum is leading him into a series of catacombs, which Frodo cautiously enters after Gollum tells him there is no other way. He either goes in or goes back. The catacombs are filled with sticky webs and the remains of dead orcs and other creatures, and Gollum abandons Frodo in the dark, gloomy caves. As Frodo is left stranded, Sam climbs back down the pass and suddenly slips, falling to a ledge near the bottom of the steps. There he finds the bread Gollum cast into the ravine, which reminds him of Gollum's evil plot against Frodo and gives him the strength to rescue his friend. Inside the caves, Frodo is in a panic. He runs nervously through the catacombs, but suddenly encounters the great spider, Shelob. He manages to keep her at bay with the light Galadriel gave him earlier when he left her cave. care, and he flees from the spider down the tunnels. It's then that Frodo is suddenly caught in one of Shelob's webs and realizes Gollum is not going to save him. It was a deliberate trap. Frodo cuts himself loose as Shelob draws closer and ultimately flees the cave, but is attacked by Gollum, who says that the ring is the reason why he tried to kill Frodo. Duh. Frodo tells Gollum he must destroy it for both of their sakes, but when Gollum attacks again, Frodo pushes him down a cliff. Now alone, Frodo continues to move, but ends up falling to the ground and saying sorry to Sam. Galadriel appears to Frodo and encourages him to go on, and he gets up and keeps moving. Near Gondor, the men of Rohan sound their war horns and prepare to ride for the city of Minas Tirith. At this point, the orcs are assaulting the walls with molten boulders. Inside the city, Denethor retreats to the Tome of Stewards, intending to burn himself along with the still-living body of Faramir. As they move past the White Tree of Gondor, we see one flower blooming before Pippin, suspecting something awful, secretly follows them into the tomb where Denethor tells his men to start building a pyre. Then the wolf-shaped battering ram breaks the gates apart and trolls begin entering the city, followed by hundreds of orcs that viciously attack Gandalf and the soldiers as they burn the first level of the city. Back with Frodo, we see him making his way towards the Tower of Cirith Ungol before Shelob suddenly stings him and wraps him in webbing, and it's at this moment that Sam arrives and holds the light of, Arendelle? At Shelob. He forces her to back away with the light and takes Frodo's sword, Sting, then fights against her claws and fangs with it. Sam ends up leaving Shelob partially blind and bleeding, and she crawls away back into her cave, at which point Sam cradles Frodo's limp body and begs his friend not to leave him, until Sting begins to glow blue, which alerts Sam of orcs coming, and he hides behind a nearby rock. As he hides, Sam overhears one of the orcs saying that Frodo is still alive, and Shelob only stings her victims to render them unconscious because she prefers live prey, and Sam realizes his mistake. The orcs take Frodo to the Tower of Cirith Ungol and imprison him in the highest room. Meanwhile in Gondor, Pippin tries to intervene with the burning of Faramir's live body, but Denethor in response throws him out, releasing him from his service of Gondor and barring the tomb's doors. Pippin rushes through Gondor to tell Gandalf, fighting through the chaos of the battle to reach him. Amidst the fighting, Pippin finds Gandalf and tells him what Denethor plans to do, and Gandalf hurries to pull Pippin up to his horse and races up to the tomb to stop the funeral pyre. But the Witch King stops them, ignoring Gandalf's warning and using his dark powers to shatter Gandalf's staff and blow him off his horse, Shadowfax. Most gorgeous horse I've ever seen. I loved this horse as a kid. I also loved this part of the movie as a kid. And now. So that's cool. This attack from the Witch King is stopped by war horns sounding outside the city, and the furious Wraith lets out a shriek as he flies toward his new threat, the army of Rohan. As Éowyn and Merry stare down the orc army, Éowyn tells Merry,
"Courage, Merry. Courage for our friends."
And King Theoden rides past his army giving his final commands.
Spears shall be shaken! Shields shall be splintered!
And that they ride now to ruin and the world's ending. Let me tell you guys, if you ever need workout motivation or general life motivation, look up the war speeches from this movie. This one from Theoden and the one later, later from Aragorn, incredible. The orcs do their best to fend off the advancing Rohirrim, but the army crashes into them, and the orcs cannot withstand them as they are crushed beneath trampling hooves. Meanwhile, in the Tome of the Stewards, Denethor continues his preparations to burn himself and Faramir alive, but is quickly stopped when Gandalf speeds into the room and tells him to stop this madness. Denethor refuses and takes one of the flames himself, setting the pyre alight. And as Gandalf fights off Denethor's guards, Pippin jumps onto the pyre and pushes Faramir out of the flames, where he regains consciousness. Denethor realizes that his son is alive, but it's too late to stop himself from burning. Consumed in flames, he runs out of the tomb and across the citadel, falling from the prow of the city and plummeting to his death. Down on the field, the riders of Rohan inflict heavy damage on the orcs and drive them towards the river, at which point they flee, but they're not safe yet. Horror sets in when they see a large row of Oliphants heading toward them. The army charges at the Oliphants, but many are quickly trampled, and above them, thousands of archers fire down on the horses. Éomer manages to kill one of the Oliphant captains, which causes the Oliphant to go uncontrolled and crash into another. Meanwhile, Éowyn and Merry bring down one of the beasts by cutting at its legs, while the Rohirrim take down another. As Éowyn aids them by sending a spear into the creature's legs and bringing it down, she and Merry are thrown from their horse and left stranded amidst the huge battle. Éowyn joins the army, cutting down several orcs. Merry also fends himself off from orcs and warriors. High up in the city, Gandalf, Pippin, and the remaining Gondorian army prep for another attack, and this is when Gandalf says these beautiful things.
Didn't think it would end this way.
End? No, the journey doesn't end here. Death is just another path. One that we all must take. The grey rain curtain of this world rolls back, and all turns to silver glass.
Gandalf. See what?
White shores. And beyond. A far green country. And a swift sunrise.
That isn't so bad.
Such a good moment, like probably one of my favorite moments from this entire franchise. Back in the field, Theoden is thrown from his horse and severely injured, and his slain horse falls upon him and pins him to the ground. It's then that Éowyn comes face to face with the Witch King, who is getting ready to deliver a final blow to Theoden.
I will kill you if you touch him.
Do not come between the Nazgul and his prey.
Éowyn distracts the Witch King and they fight, and she is struck to the ground injured. This is when the Black Fleet arrives. The orcs gather by the ships expecting reinforcements, but only find Aragorn and co., which now includes all these guys. The army of the dead charges out onto the battlefield, slaying the orcs with Aragorn leading the charge. Elsewhere on the battlefield, this happens.
You fool! No man can kill me. Die now.
I am no man.
Super sick! As they fight through the orcs, Gimli and Legolas keep a hilarious count of their kills, as an orc picks up a mace and prepares to kill Éowyn. Legolas does some sick flips up in Oliphant. This man and his flips, dude. A wounded Éowyn crawls over to her dying uncle, and Theoden tells her he's proud of her effort. When Theoden dies in Éowyn's arms, the battlefield falls silent, and as the sun rises over the aftermath, the survivors take account of the carnage. Outside of Gondor, the army of the dead confronts Aragorn and asks him to release them, and though Gimli tells Aragorn they could be helpful, Aragorn holds the army's duties fulfilled and lets them go. As Gandalf bows to Aragorn and Aragorn gives him a victorious smile, Éomer discovers Éowyn, and believing her to be dead, Aragorn and Éomer take her to the House of Healing. Aragorn treats her wound, and she later awakens and finds Faramir close by, who is healing as well. Out on the battlefield, Pippin frantically searches for Merry and finds him near the corpse of an Oliphant. Merry is wounded, and though he asks Pippin if he's going to leave him, Pippin says,
No, Merry. I'm going to look after you.
So with all of Aragorn and co. safe and headed for return, we now go back to Frodo, who is still in the hands of the orcs and wakes up to hear them fighting over his mithril shirt. A fight breaks out amongst them, while outside the tower, Sam arrives to find the whole place filled with the bodies of slain orcs from the fight. He goes to search for Frodo and kills the surviving orcs in a moment of intense courage.
That's for Frodo! The Shire! And that's for my own Gavin!
Atop the tower, Frodo tries to get free from his bonds, but is suddenly confronted by an orc, who says he's going to kill Frodo. But before he gets the chance, Sam arrives and stabs the orc through the stomach. So sick. When Frodo sees Sam, he apologizes for sending Sam away, telling him he lost the ring, at which point Sam reveals that he took it from Frodo's unconscious body in Shelob's caves, so the orcs wouldn't find it. Sam begins to hand it back to Frodo and momentarily pauses, and the wiki says this is because he is, for a moment, mesmerized by the ring's power, but I always interpret it a little differently. It always seems to me like he's nervous to give the ring back to Frodo because he knows the toll it has taken on him thus far and doesn't want it to hurt him further. But Frodo explains that the power of the ring would destroy Sam, and Sam gives it back. They don orc armor and take the road leaving the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Back in Gondor, Aragorn and his allies discuss a way to help Frodo as he conquers the seemingly impossible task of climbing up Mount Doom. They decide to draw Sauron's armies out of Mordor through the Black Gate in an attempt to distract Sauron and give Sam and Frodo the chance to reach Mount Doom undetected. That night, Aragorn uses the Palantir to tempt Sauron by revealing to him the blade of Elendil. Sauron responds by showing Aragorn a vision of Arwen dying, and in his grief, Aragorn drops the Evenstar and it breaks. But this ploy works, and the army sets their sights on Aragorn and co. Aragorn, Gandalf, Legolas, Gimli, Éomer, Merry, Pippin, and the remaining armies of Gondor and Rohan head out to Mordor, ready to confront Sauron's army. At this same moment, we see Éowyn tell Faramir that all hope is lost, to which he responds,
"As the damp of the first spring rain, I do not believe this darkness will endure."
And let me just say, Éowyn and Faramir for the win, okay? Meanwhile, Sam and Frodo, disguised as orcs, make their way into Mordor. They run into a large detachment of orcs and are forced by the captain to march with them towards the Black Gate. But when Frodo starts to collapse and asks Sam for help, the captain orc comes over to inspect them. When Sam asks what he should do, in a panic, Frodo tells him to start a fight, and in the ensuing chaos, they escape into a nearby tent as the orcs continue their march. At this point, they continue their grueling trek to Mount Doom, and we swiftly move into Take as the hobbits climb up the slopes with the Eye of Sauron looming behind them and Frodo's strength severely waning. At the Black Gate, Aragorn and co meet the Mouth of Sauron, and my god, is that an apt name, because this guy has a mouth on him. My god. The Mouth of Sauron reveals Frodo's mithril shirt and lets them know Frodo suffered greatly before he died.
Know that he suffered greatly at the hands of his host. Who would have thought one so small would endure so much pain?
And everyone in the party is greatly saddened by this, except Aragorn, who calmly rides his horse up to the Mouth of Sauron and straight up beheads him. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam walk across the hot, ashen face of Mount Doom. As they draw closer to it, the Eye of Sauron continues to search for them until he finds them. Sam quickly ducks, but Frodo is caught and collapses as the power of the One Ring weighs on his chest. But then, the Eye turns away from them and towards the Black Gate, and as Frodo and Sam continue their journey, which is feeling more and more dire by the moment as they're now firmly in Take, the Black Gate opens again and Sauron's army pours out, surrounding the tiny in comparison army that Aragorn brought. Nevertheless, Aragorn approaches the forces of Rohan and Gondor and tells them to stand their ground. He says he sees the fear in their eyes, the same fear that would take the heart of him.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight!
And the army turns to face the army of Mordor. I want to take a second and discuss why I fully believe Aragorn and co, which has grown substantially, might I add, are in Return. As I mentioned earlier, Return is not so much a physical place as it is an emotional shift in the characters. We have that line in the center of the story circle that separates order and chaos, right? And Return is the first time since the beginning of that story that we see them going back into Mordor. Mordor? While this is the climax for Sam and Frodo, which means they are still in the later parts of Take, this group of characters already went through their climax, the Battle of Gondor, and though they don't believe they will live through this fight, they are approaching it with more order and courage than they did the fight of Gondor. There is also a heightened sense of peace compared to before, though the army still believes they are marching toward their death. Basically, we can tell something has changed between this group and the group before the Battle of Gondor. This happens sometimes in series, and especially series like this that are big epics with multiple characters. Sometimes the story circles are a little bit mismatched, and what you have to do is look at the character's internal journey and not the external stuff happening. Like, yes, externally they are still in a war, right? Externally, a different character's climax is happening. Internally, their climax is over and they are in Return. That doesn't mean the audience has reached Return yet, right? Because we are still in someone's Take, so we'll get there. While he climbs up the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo suddenly collapses, and Sam comforts him while reminding him of the Shire, the strawberries that will be growing there in the spring, and the birds that nest in the trees.
Do you remember the taste of strawberries? No, Sam. I can't recall the taste of food. No, the sound of water. The touch of grass.
Frodo says he is naked in the dark, with no light or comfort between him and darkness. And Sam says, then let us be rid of it once and for all. Then, in a moment of the movie that never fails to make me cry, and I'm not gonna get emotional thinking about it.
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you. But I can carry you. Come on!
He lifts Frodo onto his back and begins to carry him the rest of the way to the volcano's entrance. The door to Mount Doom is in sight when Gollum suddenly attacks. He grabs Frodo by the throat and begins to strangle him, but Sam stops him by throwing a rock at Gollum's head and knocking him off. Meanwhile, the battle rages on at Sauron's gates as Gimli and Legolas can be seen fighting hard against their attackers. Winged Nazgul descend upon the battle. Simultaneously, Sam continues fighting Gollum while Frodo slips away and runs into Mount Doom. Sam throws Gollum down the mountainside and slices his torso with his sword, then then hurries to follow Frodo. At the Black Gate, we see as Gandalf watches the Nazgul prepare their attack, when suddenly the same little moth from his imprisonment in Saruman's tower appears. Not long after, the great eagles of the Misty Mountains arrive and attack the Nazgul mid-air. This happens as Frodo stands on the edge of the bridge in Mount Doom, overlooking the huge pool of lava below. The whole quest has been for this, destroying the ring in the mountain's fire. But as Sam pleads for Frodo to drop the ring in the fire and destroy it, Frodo listens instead to the power of the ring. He turns and tells Sam that the ring is his, and he pulls it from his place around his neck and puts it on his finger. At this, Sauron's attention is pulled back to Mount Doom, and the ring wraiths swoop towards Mordor. At the gates, Aragorn duels an Olag High and is wounded, sent falling to the ground. Legolas tries to reach him, but is stopped by the battle raging on around them. In Mount Doom, Gollum attacks again, knocking Sam unconscious with a rock and noticing Frodo has disappeared. But he uses the slight distortion in the air to locate Frodo and leaps upon him, and a fight ensues between them for the ring. And Gollum bites off Frodo's finger. Just a fact of this film. You'll have to watch that happen. It's brutal every time. We see Frodo reappear, clutching his bloodied hand and dropping to the ground in pain as Gollum joyfully leaps about in excitement over being reunited with his prized possession. Frodo, enraged, fights Gollum again, and their short but vicious brawl leads to both of them falling off the edge of the bridge. Gollum falls into the lava and burns, but the ring stays suspended. Sam hurries to the cliff's edge to see Frodo hanging by one hand. He pleads with Frodo not to let go, and as Sam grabs Frodo's hands and pulls him up over the edge, the one ring sinks into the boiling lava and melts, destroyed forever. Aragorn, who is facing death at the hands of the troll, is saved when the army of Mordor is suddenly distracted by the destruction of the ring. Sauron screeches, his eye going berserk, and his tower, which was built with the power of the ring, collapses. Aragorn and co. all cheer in happiness as the towers and gates collapse and the earth opens up to swallow Mordor's fleeing army. But the joy is short-lived when the group soon notices Mount Doom violently erupting and realizes that Sam and Frodo must be doomed. As the mountain explodes and crumbles around them, Sam carries a wounded Frodo out of Mount Doom and onto the mountainside, where they find safety on a ledge surrounded by lava. Frodo takes a moment to express his joy that the ring is gone and their quest is done.
I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee. Here at the end of all things.
But is it the end of all things? No, because it's Lord of the Rings, okay? It's gotta be happy. We gotta have some victory in there. We soon see the now unconscious Frodo and Sam being rescued by 3 eagles, with Gandalf riding on one. They swoop away with their bodies, and next we see Frodo awakening in Rivendell. He's overjoyed to wake up to Gandalf, and even happier when his friends enter one by one into the room, beginning with Merry and Pippin, followed by Gimli, Legolas, Aragorn, and finally Samwise. This is Sam and Frodo's return. And now we have entered Changed for all of our characters. That day, the streets of Minas Tirith are filled as Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor by Gandalf and unexpectedly reunited with Arwen, and everyone applauds as they kiss. Then the hobbits bow to Aragorn as he approaches, and he says,
My friends.
You bow to no one.
In return, Aragorn and all his people pay homage to the hobbits by bowing to them. The 4 hobbits then return to the Shire, and we can tell they are different now. They're happy to be home and enjoying drinks at the Green Dragon Inn like they used to, but they are not the same people they were the last time they did this. Sam bravely approaches Rosie Cotton, and we see them wed, where all the hobbits applaud. Over time, Frodo begins to feel that he will not be able to continue his old life in the Shire. Upon titling his section of Bilbo's memoir, The Lord of the Rings, he tells Sam it has been 4 years to the day since Weathertop, and his wound has never fully healed. That night, Sam, Frodo, Merry, Pippin, and Gandalf accompany the now aged Bilbo to the Grey Havens, where the last elven ship is waiting to leave Middle-earth. Gandalf tells the hobbits that he will also be departing on this ship, news that is met with tears. Before he tells Frodo it is time, the hobbits slowly realize that Frodo will also be leaving, at which point he says farewell to each of his friends, Sam last, and gives the book he and Bilbo were working on to Sam before taking Gandalf's hand and stepping onto the ship. As the ship sets off to sail to the Undying Lands, he turns back and gives his friends one last truly joyful smile. Later, Sam returns home, where his wife and 2 children greet him, and as he does in the book, he says to himself,
Well, I'm back.
and closes out the trilogy. So there are the story circles for our 3 movies. But what about the story circle for the entire trilogy? The story circle has 8 parts, which admittedly can be tough to distribute between 3 different installments of a story. That being said, I like to think that the first story in a trilogy spans you, need, and go, while the second spans search and find, and the third goes into take, return, and changed. Again, this isn't always how it shakes out, but I think it's a fantastic recipe for a great trilogy. Let's look at the first movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. As we talked about before, the youth section of this movie begins with Galadriel introducing us to the world and the rings, and includes Bilbo's 11th birthday. Then we move on to Need, when Gandalf tells Frodo he has the One Ring and needs to leave the Shire immediately. Go happens when Frodo and Sam leave the Shire while Gandalf visits Saruman. Search consists of Gandalf being trapped in Saruman's tower, Merry and Pippin joining Frodo and Sam in their quest, the hobbits finding Strider, Strider taking them to Rivendell, and Frodo getting stabbed at Weathertop and being taken to Rivendell ahead of the rest of the group, where he's healed. The midpoint of the story is marked by discussion about what to do with the ring, during which Frodo volunteers to take it to Mordor, and the Fellowship is formed. Then in Find, the Fellowship struggles against the storm Sauron created and takes refuge in the mines of Moria, where they fight goblins and a Balrog. In Take, Gandalf dies to the Balrog, Boromir tries to take the ring from Frodo, and the party is attacked by orcs that take Boromir's life. Finally, in Return and Changed, Frodo decides to separate from the rest of the group and to continue his journey on his own, and Sam goes with him. To put these events into perspective concerning the trilogy, we have to condense them into You, Need, and Go. I believe the trilogy's You section consists of everything before the midpoint of the movie, and the Need part of the trilogy contains everything after the midpoint, except those last few moments when Frodo decides to separate from the group and Sam follows him. That's the trilogy's Go. Here's an overview of the Two Towers. In the You section, we see Gandalf's true battle with the Balrog before we rejoin Sam and Frodo, who soon run into and capture Gollum before Frodo takes pity on him and enlists him as their guide through Mordor, while Aragorn and co continue their search for Merry and Pippin, who were captured at the end of the first movie. The Need section introduces us to Rohan and its king and its plight. It's being ruthlessly attacked by Saruman's army, and this section also introduces us to Frodo and Sam's need to find a safe way into Mordor. In Go, Merry and Pippin escape into Fangorn Forest during an ambush on the orcs. Aragorn and co run into a reborn Gandalf, and Frodo puts his faith in Gollum as their guide. In Search, Gandalf rids Theoden of Saruman's stupor and he throws out Grima. And while Éowyn and Aragorn lead the people of Rohan to Helm's Deep, Gandalf leaves to retrieve Éomer's reinforcements for the upcoming battle. Meanwhile, Frodo and Sam struggle through Mordor alongside Gollum, and when orcs attack Aragorn and co, Aragorn is thrown off a cliffside into the river and presumed dead, but he washes up on the shore and rides to Helm's Deep. The midpoint comes when Faramir captures Frodo and Sam, Aragorn warns Helm's Deep of the nearby horde of orcs, Merry and Pippin's midpoint happens upon meeting Treebeard. Then in Find, Frodo saves Gollum's life, and Sam persuades Faramir not to take the ring from Frodo. Merry and Pippin unsuccessfully attempt to persuade the Ents to help in the fight against Saruman. In Take, orcs manage to get into Helm's Deep, Pippin leads Treebeard to the fallen Ents, and the Ents subsequently begin a march to Isengard, and the battle rages on. Frodo nearly gives up the ring, only to almost kill Sam after he intervenes. In return, Aragorn inspires Theoden to continue fighting, and at Helm's Deep they are able to redirect the orcs to Fangorn, where the Ents drown them and put a stop to the fighting, for now. Sam encourages Frodo to continue fighting with an inspirational monologue, which convinces an eavesdropping Faramir to let the hobbits go. In Changed, Gandalf says the battle for Middle-earth is about to begin, and tells those with him, along with us watching, that all hope now lies with Frodo and Sam, who we see resuming their journey with Gollum. As I said earlier, the second movie needs to fit into two sections: Search and Find. And as I've mentioned throughout the video, the best way to define the difference between these sections is to look for your midpoint, which for the overall trilogy is, I believe, Aragorn alerting Helm's Deep of the upcoming attack, and subsequently preparations for the battle beginning. Everything before Aragorn's warning in this movie falls into the Search section of the trilogy, with everything after Aragorn's warning belonging to Find. And finally, we have The Return of the King, a doozy if I ever saw one. In this movie's You, we see Gollum's past and how he came to be the deteriorated being he is today by killing his cousin for the ring and hiding out in the Misty Mountains with it. After that, we see Gollum is still guiding Sam and Frodo, and Sam is still not happy about it. Aragorn and co reach the flooded Isengard. We then move to Need as Saruman taunts the group, telling them Frodo is headed for doom and Aragorn will never be king. Saruman dies on the watermill, and Pippin gets the Palantir as it falls out of Saruman's sleeve. While Frodo and Sam sleep, Gollum plots to kill them, and when Sam lashes out at him in anger, Frodo stops him. The victorious Aragorn and co ride for Rohan, where they celebrate the victory at Helm's Deep with a fun drinking game and dancing. Aragorn and Gandalf discuss Frodo's quest, and Gandalf tells Aragorn that his heart confirms the Hobbit is alive. We reach Go when Pippin, fascinated by the Palantir, steals it from a sleeping Gandalf, and sees a vision of a dead white tree in a courtyard of stone surrounded by a city in flames. Gandalf tells Theoden to look to the beacons of Gondor for signs of war and enlists Aragorn to use the black ships to aid Gondor before setting out for Gondor with Pippin to keep him safe from Sauron. Frodo, Sam, and Gollum see a pillar of green fire rise from Minas Morgul before the huge army of Mordor sets out for Gondor, and they decide to follow Gollum for a safer route. That brings us to Search, in which we see Arwen convince Elrond to reforge the Sword of Elendil for Aragorn. Gandalf and Pippin ride to Minas Tirith, and Pippin sees the tree from his vision outside the throne hall there. Gandalf tells him not to speak, but when Pippin sees Denethor's state, he tells Denethor how Boromir died and pledges his service to Denethor in gratitude. Denethor refuses help in the battle as he wants Gondor to remain his. Gandalf later explains to Pippin the line of kings failing and Gondor being given to lesser men before they see the signal from Mordor. While Sam warns Gollum not to hurt Frodo or else, Pippin climbs up on Gondor's signal beacon and lights it. Meanwhile, attacks begin on Osgiliath, and as Frodo and Sam are climbing the steps on the cliff, Gollum slips, and when Frodo saves him, begins poisoning Frodo against Sam, telling him Sam will try to take the ring. The midpoint here happens when Pippin lights the signal beacon of Gondor, and Gandalf sees other beacons lighting up along the mountains. Aragorn tells Theoden that Gondor has called for aid, and Theoden decides to answer, so Aragorn and co get ready to ride for Gondor and to war as Merry pledges his allegiance to Theoden. As they all leave for Gondor, Gollum throws the hobbit's bread down the cliff, and when Sam gets angry with the creature, Frodo tells Sam they don't need him anymore and demands that he leave and go home, so Sam turns back. We reach Find as Osgiliath is overrun by orcs and Faramir and his men in retreat. Denethor has his whole "I'm so ashamed of you" fest with Faramir before sending him back to Osgiliath and his death, and Pippin sings to Denethor while Faramir rides back to war. Gollum leads Frodo into a trap in Shelob's caves, and when Sam falls to the bottom of the steps and finds the bread Gollum threw down, he remembers his mission of protecting Frodo and goes back for his friend. As he uses Galadriel's light to keep Shelob away, Shelob stings Frodo and wraps him in her webbing. When Sam finds Frodo's body, he begs him not to leave him, but he hides from the orcs when Frodo's sword's sting glows blue, signifying that they're nearby. The orcs discuss why Frodo isn't really dead and take him with them into the Tower of Cirith Ungol. Sam follows them and ventures into the tower to save Frodo, who is nearly about to be killed by an orc when Sam stabs the orc in the stomach from behind and saves him. Frodo apologizes to Sam, and Sam reveals he has the ring, at which point he gives it back to Frodo. They put on orc armor and leave the tower, but get stuck with the orc army for a minute before starting a fight as a ploy to escape the detachment and continue up to Mount Doom with waning strength. We move into Take when Aragorn has a nightmare and goes into Theoden's tent, where Elrond gives him Arendelle, and Aragorn decides to accept his destiny to be king and takes the sword from Elrond, then recruits the army of the dead with Legolas and Gimli. Éowyn takes Merry with her when Theoden refuses to let him into the battle, and the attack on Minas Tirith begins while Denethor despairs over the seemingly dead Faramir, at which point Gandalf knocks Denethor out and tells the city to prepare for battle. Aragorn and co use the army of the dead to take over the Black Ships, and while the men of Rohan prepare to ride for Gondor, Denethor begins his plan to burn himself and Faramir alive together, and throws Pippin out of his service when he tries to stop him. As the gates break open and trolls and orcs begin entering the city, Pippin runs for Gandalf's help, and Gandalf sets out to stop Denethor's plan. They're delayed by the Witch King, while Éowyn tells Merry to remain courageous, and King Theoden talks to his army about riding to ruin and the world's ending. Gandalf and Pippin stop Denethor's plan and save Faramir just as Oliphants arrive on the field. Merry and Éowyn are stranded in the fields as they help take the Oliphants down, and the Black Fleet arrives and the army of the dead comes out to start tearing down the orc army as Éowyn kills the Witch King. Theoden dies, and as he does, the battlefield goes quiet. Meanwhile, with Sam and Frodo, Frodo is caught in the Eye of Sauron on Mount Doom, but when the eye is distracted, they continue their journey. Frodo collapses on Mount Doom, and Sam decides to carry him the rest of the way up to the entrance when Gollum attacks them. As Sam fights Gollum off, Frodo runs the rest of the way to Mount Doom, but upon the edge of the bridge in Mount Doom, Frodo decides he can't destroy the ring and instead puts it on. In response, Gollum bites Frodo's finger off, and they fight for the ring before both falling off the cliffside. Gollum falls in the lava and so does the ring, but Sam manages to rescue Frodo from death as the ring melts in the flames. Mount Doom explodes and Frodo and Sam narrowly escape, then find refuge on a rock where they finally collapse to their exhaustion. In this movie's return, Aragorn holds the army of the dead's duties and lets them go, and Éowyn is taken to the House of Healing. Pippin finds Merry on the battlefield before Aragorn and co decide to distract Saruman from Frodo and Sam by going to Mordor themselves. When Aragorn beheads the mouth of Sauron at the Black Gate, Sauron's army pours out of the Black Gate, and Aragorn gives his army his 10 out of 10 speech about standing their ground. The Battle of Mordor begins, and as it rages on, Gandalf whispers to his moth friend. The moth brings back the great eagles, who start fighting Nazgul birds mid-air. Aragorn is on the brink of death at the sword of an Olog-hai when, in response to the ring being destroyed, Sauron's eye explodes, his tower collapses, and his army falls into the earth. The Eagles rescue Sam and Frodo and take them to Rivendell to be healed, and Frodo is reunited with all of his friends from the Fellowship. Now we've reached Changed, in which Aragorn is crowned King of Gondor, everyone bows to the hobbits, and the hobbits return to the Shire, different now than they used to be. Sam approaches Rosie and they end up getting married, and Frodo titles his section of Bilbo's memoir The Lord of the Rings. And when Bilbo leaves for the Undying Lands, both Gandalf and Frodo go with him, and Frodo gives his friends one last truly joyous smile as they depart. Sam returns to his family and says, "Well, I'm back." Now, to fit this third movie into the trilogy's story circle, we have to fill Take, Return, and Changed. Because of the nature of this movie, I believe this movie's Return and Changed are also the trilogy's Return and Changed, with everything before that in this movie being the Take section of the trilogy, which means our trilogy story circle looks like this. As you can see, the story circle isn't just good for simpler, smaller stories with maybe one or two characters to follow. You can also use it in your epic fantasies successfully, as Tolkien did. And it makes for a very compelling and character-driven story, as always. You can use the story circle with multiple protagonists and many storylines going at once, and I encourage you to try. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to do the YouTube things, like, subscribe, comment, check out the Patreon, all of that stuff, and I will see you next week. Happy trails!